The crowd surged like a living thing, bodies pressing from all sides as panic rippled through the summer festival. Audrey's heart hammered as small fingers clutched her hand with desperate strength. She looked down at the little girl, no more than 4, with dark curls and tear-streaked cheeks, and made a decision that would change everything. "I've got you," she whispered, pulling the child against her legs as someone shoved past. Then the crowd parted. Men in dark suits materialized like shadows, their hands inside their jackets, eyes scanning with predatory focus, and behind them, a man who made the air itself seem to still. Tall, devastatingly handsome, with eyes like winter storms and a face carved from marble and violence. His gaze found his daughter first, then lifted to Audrey. Something flickered in those cold eyes, something that made her breath catch. He moved toward them with lethal grace, and when he reached them, he didn't take his daughter. Instead, his hand came to rest on Audrey's shoulder, fingers warm through her thin cotton dress, and he leaned close enough that she could smell expensive cologne and danger. One word, just one word spoken in a voice like smoke and silk. "Stay." 3 hours earlier, Audrey Cooper had exactly $47 in her bank account, a studio apartment with a radiator that only worked on Tuesdays, and a master's degree in art history that qualified her to work at the Brooklyn Public Library for $12 an hour. She also had pride, stubborn, inconvenient pride that kept her chin up as she walked through the crowds gathering for the annual Sunset Park Summer Festival. Even though her shoes had holes in the soles and her dress had been mended so many times, it was more thread than fabric. The festival stretched along Fifth Avenue, vendors hawking everything from handmade jewelry to authentic Italian cannoli. Music drifted from a stage at the far end, mixing with laughter and the excited squeals of children. Audrey allowed herself a small smile. She couldn't afford to buy anything, but she could enjoy the atmosphere. That was free. "Miss Audrey." She turned to see Mrs. Chen from the library, waving from a dumpling stand. The elderly woman's face creased with warmth as Audrey approached. "You look too thin," Mrs. Chen declared, already wrapping dumplings in paper. "Eat." "Mrs. Chen, I can't." "You can. Consider it payment for helping my grandson with his homework last week." The woman pressed the warm package into Audrey's hands with a look that brooked no argument. Audrey's throat tightened. These small kindnesses kept her afloat. "Thank you." She found a spot on a bench near the children's area, savoring each dumpling slowly. Kids ran past, faces painted like butterflies and tigers, dragging patient parents toward the next attraction. Audrey watched them with a familiar ache. She'd always imagined having a family by now. Instead, at 27, she was alone in a city of millions, barely surviving. The crowd began to thicken as the afternoon wore on. More people poured into the festival, drawn by the promise of evening performances. Audrey stood, preparing to leave before the crush became unbearable, when she noticed the little girl. She stood alone near the face-painting booth, her dark curls held back by a silver clip that probably cost more than Audrey's monthly rent. Her dress was pristine white, completely impractical for a festival, and her shoes were polished leather. Everything about her screamed money, except for the tears sliding down her cheeks and the trembling of her small chin. Audrey looked around for parents or guardians. No one seemed to be searching for the child. The little girl's breath came in hitching gasps, the beginning of real panic. Making a decision, Audrey crouched down a few feet away, making herself smaller and less threatening. "Hi there. Are you lost?" The girl's enormous brown eyes fixed on her, swimming with tears. She nodded. "That's okay. We'll find your family. Can you tell me your name?" "Serena." Her voice was barely a whisper. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Audrey." She smiled gently. "Do you remember where you last saw your daddy or mommy?" "Daddy." Serena's lower lip trembled. "The man bumped me, and then I couldn't see him, and there were so many people." Her words dissolved into a sob. Audrey's heart clenched. She extended her hand slowly. "Would it be okay if I helped you find your daddy?" Serena hesitated only a moment before placing her small hand in Audrey's. Her fingers were cold despite the summer heat. They started toward the information booth, but the crowd had grown dense. Bodies pressed from all sides as people jockeyed for position near the main stage. Audrey pulled Serena closer, feeling the little girl's grip tighten painfully. Then someone shouted. Audrey never learned what caused the initial panic. Maybe someone fainted or there was a perceived threat. But suddenly the crowd surged. People pushed and shoved, and Serena's hand was nearly torn from hers. Hold on! Audrey scooped the child up, pressing her against her chest as the crowd churned around them. Serena's arms locked around her neck, her face buried against Audrey's shoulder. I've got you. I've got you. The world became a blur of bodies and noise. Audrey used her back to absorb impacts, keeping Serena protected as she fought to stay upright. Her heart hammered. If they fell, they'd be trampled. Then suddenly, the pressure eased. The crowd parted as if pushed by invisible hands, and Audrey found herself in a pocket of space. Men in dark suits surrounded them, their faces hard, hands suspiciously positioned inside their jackets. And then, he was there. Victor Mancini moved through the crowd like a force of nature. He was tall, easily 6'3", with broad shoulders that strained against his black dress shirt. His hair was dark, styled with casual precision, and his face was a study in masculine beauty and barely contained violence. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips pressed into a hard line, but it was his eyes that made Audrey's breath catch. Grey, cold, and absolutely ruthless. Those eyes swept over the scene, cataloguing threats with military precision, before landing on Serena. Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, but the edge of his rage redirected itself away from the child, away from Audrey. He reached them in 3 strides, and Audrey suddenly understood who she was dealing with. The expensive clothes, the armed guards, the way people unconsciously moved out of his path. This man was dangerous, possibly the most dangerous man she'd ever encountered. "Daddy!" Serena's cry was muffled against Audrey's shoulder, but the relief in it was unmistakable. Victor's hand came to rest on Audrey's shoulder. The touch was warm, possessive in a way that made her pulse jump. He leaned in, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, smell the expensive cologne that probably cost more than her rent. His voice, when he spoke, was like smoke and silk and promises of violence. "Stay." Audrey's rational mind screamed at her to run. Everything about Victor Mancini radiated danger. From the gun she could see holstered under his jacket, to the way his men positioned themselves with military precision, creating a protective circle around them. But Serena's arms were still locked around her neck, and the little girl was trembling. "She's safe," Audrey managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Just scared." Victor's eyes hadn't left her face. Up close she could see they weren't purely grey. Flecks of silver caught the light, making them almost metallic, beautiful and utterly cold. "Papa, the man pushed me and I got lost, and there were so many people." Serena's words tumbled out in a rush as she finally turned to her father, reaching for him. Victor took his daughter with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything else about him. Serena buried her face in his neck, her small body still shaking with residual fear. His large hand cradled the back of her head, and for just a moment Audrey saw something human flicker across his features. "Shh, Piccola, you're safe now." His accent was faint but unmistakable. Italian-American, probably 2nd or 3rd generation. He murmured something else in Italian, too soft for Audrey to catch, and Serena's trembling began to ease. One of the suited men leaned in, speaking quietly. "Sir, we should move. Too exposed here." Victor nodded once, then those winter storm eyes returned to Audrey. "You protected her." It wasn't a question, but Audrey answered anyway. "Anyone would have." "No." The word was absolute. "They wouldn't have." "What's your name?" She should lie. Every instinct screamed that getting involved with this man was a terrible idea. But something about the intensity of his gaze made deception impossible. "Audrey Cooper." Audrey. He said her name like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. "I'm Victor. This is Serena." His hand moved to rest on his daughter's back. "You saved her from being trampled, possibly worse. I don't forget debts." "There's no debt. I saw a scared little girl, that's all." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. "Nevertheless, Marco?" He didn't raise his voice, but one of the suited men immediately stepped forward. "Get Miss Cooper's information. Address, phone number." "That's really not necessary." "It is." Victor's tone left no room for argument. Then, unexpectedly, his expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. "Serena would like to thank you properly, when she's calmer, and I prefer to express my gratitude more substantially than words." Audrey wanted to refuse, but Serena chose that moment to lift her head and look at her with those enormous brown eyes. "Will you come visit me? Please? How did you say no to that?" Audrey hesitated. Please, Serena whispered again, and Audrey felt her resistance crumble. Okay. Victor nodded, satisfied. Marco will drive you home. I can take the subway. You'll ride with Marco. Again, that tone that accepted no opposition. It's the least I can do, and these crowds are dangerous, as we've just established. Before Audrey could protest further, she found herself being efficiently escorted to a black SUV that probably cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. Marco held the door open, his face carefully neutral, and Audrey climbed in because refusing seemed more complicated than accepting. The interior smelled like leather and money. Audrey gave Marco her address, acutely aware of how pathetic it would sound. He didn't react, just nodded and pulled into traffic. Through the tinted window, Audrey watched Victor carry Serena to another SUV, surrounded by his guards. Just before he climbed in, he turned and looked directly at her vehicle. Even from a distance, she felt the weight of that gaze. Then he was gone, and Audrey was left wondering what she'd just gotten herself into. Marco pulled up outside her building 20 minutes later, a walk-up in a neighborhood that was politely called transitional. The brick facade was crumbling, and someone had tagged the front door with graffiti that the landlord never bothered to clean. "Thank you for the ride," Audrey said, reaching for the door handle. "Miss Cooper." Marco's voice stopped her. When she turned, he was holding out a business card, heavy cardstock cream-colored, with a single phone number embossed in black. Nothing else. "Mr. Mancini will call you tomorrow to arrange a meeting. Please answer." It wasn't a request. Audrey took the card, her fingers trembling slightly. "What if I don't?" Marco's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made her stomach clench. "Mr. Mancini doesn't like to be refused, and he always gets what he wants." A pause. For what it's worth, his gratitude is genuine. Serena is everything to him. That, somehow, made it worse. A man who loved that deeply was capable of anything to protect what was his. Audrey climbed out of the SUV and watched it drive away, the card burning like a brand in her palm. Victor Mancini stood in his daughter's bedroom, watching her sleep. Serena's breathing had finally evened out after an hour of nightmares and tears. The festival incident had terrified her more than he'd initially realized. He'd failed her, let his attention drift for 30 seconds while speaking to an associate, and she'd been swept away by the crowd. Those 30 seconds had aged him a decade. When he'd seen her in that woman's arms, safe and protected, something in his chest had cracked. Audrey Cooper. He'd already had Marco run a background check. 27, library assistant, master's degree in art history from Columbia. No criminal record, no family to speak of, parents dead, no siblings, lived alone in a shoebox apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots weren't uncommon. Bank account with less than $50. She was no one, nothing. A woman the city would swallow without a trace if she disappeared. But she'd held his daughter like she was precious, had put herself between Serena and danger without hesitation, expecting nothing in return. Victor didn't understand people like that. In his world, everything was a transaction. Loyalty was bought, fear was currency, and trust was a weakness that got you killed. Yet Audrey Cooper had looked at him with those forest green eyes, chin lifted despite obvious fear, and refused his money. She'd said there was no debt. She was wrong. Victor Mancini always paid his debts, and he always protected what was his. The question was, what exactly did he plan to do about Audrey Cooper? He pulled out his phone, looking at the information Marco had compiled. Her address made his jaw tighten. The building had 3 violations with the city, and the crime rate in that area was unacceptable. She'd saved his daughter. She deserved better than that. Victor made a decision. He sent a single text to Marco. "Tomorrow, bring her to the house. Noon." Then he returned his attention to Serena, adjusting her blankets and brushing a kiss against her forehead. "You're safe, Piccola," he murmured. "And so is she. I'll make sure of it." Even if Audrey Cooper didn't know she needed saving yet. Audrey stared at her phone, Victor's name glowing on the screen like a warning. She'd been ignoring his calls for 2 days, but apparently he decided phone calls weren't working. The text was simple. "My car will pick you up at 11:30. We need to talk." "Vino, please, no request." Just an assumption that she'd comply, she typed back, "I have to work." His response came within seconds. "I've already called the library. You have the day off. Paid." Audrey's hands trembled with a mixture of anger and something that felt dangerously like anticipation. He'd called her workplace? Who did that? "You can't just—" 11:30, Audrey. Don't make me come get you myself." She shouldn't go. Everything about this screamed danger. But then she thought about Serena's small hand in hers, those frightened tears, and something in her chest softened. One visit. She'd see how Serena was doing, accept whatever thank you Victor felt was necessary, and then she'd extricate herself from this situation. Simple. The SUV that picked her up was even more intimidating than Marco, a mountain of a man named Ivan who barely spoke. Audrey sat in the back seat, watching Brooklyn turn into Manhattan, then over the bridge into New Jersey. The houses grew larger, the neighborhoods more exclusive. Iron gates and long driveways, old money and new fortunes built on activities that didn't bear close examination. They finally turned onto a private road that wound through manicured grounds. The house, mansion really, appeared gradually through the trees. It was massive, all stone and glass, somehow both modern and timeless. Security cameras dotted the perimeter, and Audrey spotted at least 3 more guards before they even reached the front entrance. Ivan opened her door, his face expressionless. "Mr. Mancini is waiting." The front door opened before Audrey could knock, revealing Marco. His expression was slightly warmer than last time, which meant it was only 90% intimidating instead of 100. "Miss Cooper, welcome." He stepped aside to let her enter. The interior stole her breath. Marble floors, high ceilings, artwork that probably cost more than her entire education. But it wasn't cold. There were signs of life everywhere. Serena's toys in a basket by the stairs, a sweater draped over a chair, family photos on the mantel. Audrey! She barely had time to brace herself before Serena launched into her arms, small body colliding with her legs. Audrey crouched down instinctively, and Serena's arms wrapped around her neck in a fierce hug. "You came. Daddy said you would, but I was worried you wouldn't, and I made you a picture. Look, Serena, let the woman breathe." Victor's voice cut through his daughter's chatter, amused but firm. Audrey looked up to find him standing in a doorway, dressed more casually than at the festival. Dark jeans and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscled forearms and what looked like the edge of a tattoo. He was even more devastating in this setting. Relaxed, almost approachable. Almost. "Sorry, Papa." Serena pulled back but kept one hand firmly gripping Audrey's. "But look, I drew Audrey saving me." She held up a crayon drawing, Audrey recognizable by her blonde hair, Serena by her dark curls, both surrounded by scribbled people. "It's beautiful," Audrey said honestly, her heart squeezing. "You can keep it. I made it for you." Serena beamed. "Serena, why don't you go find Maria? She has your lunch ready." Victor's tone was gentle but left no room for argument. "But, now Piccola, Audrey will still be here when you're done." Serena looked between them, then nodded reluctantly. She pressed the drawing into Audrey's hands and scampered off, calling for Maria, leaving Audrey alone with Victor. He moved closer, and she forced herself not to step back. His presence was overwhelming, not just physically, though he towered over her 5'5" frame, but in the way he commanded space, made the air feel charged. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice lower now, intimate. "I wasn't sure you would. You didn't leave me much choice." A smile ghosted across his lips. "No, I didn't. Come, let's talk in my office." He led her through the house to a room that was pure masculine elegance. Dark wood, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with what looked like actual books, not just decoration. A desk that probably cost more than her car, if she had a car. Victor gestured to a chair and moved to pour 2 glasses of something amber from a crystal decanter. "Whiskey. It's 11:45 in the morning." "So?" He handed her the glass anyway, then settled into the chair across from her, rather than behind his desk. A deliberate choice, she realized, meant to put her more at ease. It didn't work. Audrey took a small sip. The whiskey was smooth, expensive, and burned pleasantly down her throat. "Why am I here, Mr. Mancini?" "Victor. And you're here because you saved my daughter's life, and I want to repay that debt. I told you there's no debt." "There is." His grey eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. "In my world, Audrey, debts matter. They're everything, and I owe you one I can never fully repay." She set down her glass. "Then consider it repaid. Serena's safe, she's happy. That's enough." "It's not." Victor leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and Audrey caught the scent of his cologne again, cedar and something darker, more dangerous. "I've had people look into your situation. You're living in a building that should be condemned, working a job that barely pays rent, And you have a degree you can't use because the art world is for people with trust funds and connections. Heat flooded Audrey's cheeks, anger and humiliation mixing toxically. You investigated me. I investigate everyone who gets close to my daughter. It's not personal. But the way he looked at her felt very personal. What I found made me concerned. I don't need your concern, or your pity. It's not pity. His voice dropped even lower. I'm offering you a job. Audrey blinked. Of all the things she'd expected, that wasn't it. A job. Serena needs a tutor, someone to help prepare her for school, teach her reading, art, music, someone she already trusts. He paused. Someone I trust. You don't know me. I know enough. You protected her without thought for yourself. You didn't ask for money or try to leverage the situation, and Serena hasn't stopped talking about you for 2 days. She likes you. That's rare. Victor stood, moving to look out the window at the grounds where Serena was now playing with a small dog. I can pay you more than the library does. Significantly more. You'd have your own suite here, meals provided, access to the private art collection for your research if you wanted. In exchange, you'd work with Serena 5 days a week, evenings and weekends off. It was too much. Too generous. There had to be a catch. Why? Audrey asked. You could hire someone with more experience, better credentials. Victor turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Because Serena's mother died 2 years ago. Cancer. She was not a good woman, but Serena doesn't need to know that yet. Since then, my daughter has been terrified of losing people she cares about. She has nightmares, trust issues. His jaw tightened, and Audrey saw the crack in his armor, the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. But with you, she felt safe immediately. I don't know why, and I don't question miracles. I'm asking you to give her that safety, to be the stable presence she needs. Audrey's heart hammered. This was insane. Moving into the home of a man who was clearly involved in organized crime, becoming entangled in his world. It was dangerous and stupid, and she thought of her apartment, the leak in the ceiling, the way she had to choose between groceries and medication when she got sick. She thought of her degree collecting dust, her dreams of working in a museum dying a little more each day. She thought of Serena's small hand in hers, trusting and desperate. I need time to think about it. Victor nodded slowly. 48 hours, then I need an answer. He pulled out his phone, typed something, and hers buzzed in her pocket. I've sent you the formal offer. Salary, benefits, everything outlined. Read it. Think about it. But Audrey... He moved closer, and suddenly he was right there, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, close enough that she could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his pupils dilated slightly as he looked at her. Whatever you've heard about me, whatever you might guess about what I do, it's probably true. I'm not a good man, but I protect what's mine with everything I have. If you accept this job, you'll be under my protection. Nothing and no one will touch you. You'll be safe here, safer than you've ever been. His hand came up, and Audrey's breath stopped as his fingers ghosted along her jaw, barely touching but leaving fire in their wake. Think about it, he murmured. Then he stepped back, the moment breaking like a spell. Marco will drive you home. Audrey left in a daze, Serena's drawing clutched in her hands and Victor's offer burning in her pocket, like a promise or a threat. She had 48 hours to decide if she was brave enough or foolish enough to step into Victor Mancini's dangerous world. Audrey stood in her apartment, staring at the formal offer Victor had sent. The salary was obscene, more than triple what she made at the library. The benefits included full medical, dental, vision, a stipend for clothing and personal expenses, a private suite with its own bathroom and sitting area. It was everything she needed and more. It was also a cage, she thought. A beautiful, gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. Her phone buzzed. Not Victor, her landlord. Rent increase. 400 month starting next month. Take it or leave. Audrey closed her eyes. $400 she didn't have. In a building that was falling apart. In a neighborhood where she'd been mugged twice. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from the library. Budget cuts. Reducing your hours to 20 a week. The universe, it seemed, had made her decision for her. She called the number on Victor's card. He answered on the first ring, his voice making something low in her stomach tighten. Audrey, I'll take the job, but I have conditions. A pause. Then, I'm listening. I want a contract. Everything in writing. My hours, my duties, my private space. I'm Serena's tutor, nothing more. I'm not involved in your business. And if I want to leave, I can. No strings, no threats. Agreed. Anything else? She took a breath. I want access to your art collection for my own research. You mentioned it, and I've been working on a thesis I never finished. If I'm going to put my career on hold, I want something to show for it. Done. Marco will bring the contract by tonight. You can start Monday. That's 4 days from now. You need time to pack and settle your affairs. I'm not unreasonable. A pause. Thank you, Audrey, for trusting me with this. She wasn't sure trust was the right word, but she'd made her choice. Monday morning arrived too quickly. Audrey stood outside Victor's estate with 2 suitcases containing everything she owned, feeling like she was crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. Marco met her at the door, his expression as neutral as ever. Miss Cooper, welcome. I'll show you to your suite. Her rooms were on the 2nd floor near Serena's, but with enough distance for privacy. They were beautiful. A bedroom with a massive bed and soft linens, a bathroom with a tub that could double as a swimming pool, and a sitting area with a desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Mr. Mancini thought you might appreciate the light, Marco said, gesturing to the large windows overlooking the gardens. And the library is yours to use any time. Audrey's throat tightened. Victor had thought about what she'd like, had prepared this space for her specifically. Thank you, Marco. He nodded and left her to unpack. She was hanging her few dresses in the enormous closet when small footsteps pounded down the hall. Audrey, you're here! Serena burst into the room, her face glowing with excitement. Papa said you were coming to live with us. We're going to have so much fun, and I can show you my toys, and we can read together and— Serena. Victor appeared in the doorway, his expression fond but firm. Give Audrey space to settle in. She just arrived. Sorry. Serena didn't look particularly sorry, but she did slow down. Can we start lessons today? Audrey smiled. The little girl's enthusiasm was infectious. How about tomorrow? Today I need to get organized. Okay. Serena hugged her quickly, then darted off, leaving Audrey alone with Victor. He leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, looking more relaxed than she'd yet seen him. She's been counting the days. She's wonderful, Audrey said honestly. You're lucky. I know. His eyes traveled over her, not lecherously, but with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Are your rooms acceptable? If you need anything changed, they're perfect, more than perfect. Thank you. Victor pushed off the doorframe, moving into the room. In the space meant for her, he seemed even larger, more present. Audrey found herself backing up slightly, hitting the edge of the desk. He noticed, and something flickered in his eyes. I should let you finish unpacking, but Audrey— He was close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes, the faint scar along his jaw. If you need anything, any time, you tell me. You're under my protection now. That means something. What does it mean? The question came out breathier than she'd intended. Victor's hand came up, and this time he didn't hesitate. His fingers traced along her jaw, tipping her face up to his. It means you're mine to protect, mine to provide for. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Mine. Then he stepped back, the moment shattering. Dinner is at 7, casual. Serena will come get you. He left, and Audrey realized she was trembling. What had she gotten herself into? The first week passed in a blur. Audrey fell into a routine with Serena. Mornings were for structured lessons, afternoons for creative play and exploration. The little girl was bright, curious, and starved for attention. She soaked up everything Audrey taught her like a sponge. Victor was often gone during the day, conducting business Audrey didn't ask about, but he was always home for dinner, and those meals became the highlight of her day. He was surprisingly good company, intelligent, well-read, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. She tried not to notice how her pulse jumped when he walked into a room, tried not to think about the way his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. On Friday night, Audrey was working in the library Victor had mentioned, a stunning room filled with rare books and artwork. She'd found a Caravaggio sketch she was certain was authentic, and she was deep in research when Victor appeared. It's past midnight, he said quietly, not wanting to startle her. Audrey jumped anyway, pressing a hand to her racing heart. God, you scared me. Sorry. He moved closer, looking at her notes. What are you working on? Your Caravaggio. I think it might be from his early Roman period, before he— She stopped, realizing she was about to launch into a lecture. Sorry, I get excited about this stuff. Don't apologize, I like watching you get excited. His voice was warm, genuine. He pulled up a chair beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Tell me about it. So she did, and Victor listened, really listened, asking intelligent questions and seeming genuinely interested. At some point, Audrey realized she was leaning into him, drawn by his warmth and presence. You love this, Victor said eventually. It wasn't a question. I do. I always thought I'd work in a museum, maybe become a curator, but the art world is, difficult to break into. You could still do it. After Serena starts school, if you wanted, maybe. But Audrey found she wasn't sure she wanted to leave. Wasn't sure she wanted to leave him. The thought terrified her. Victor seemed to sense her shift in mood. His hand came to rest over hers on the table, warm and solid. You look tired. You should sleep. So should you. I don't sleep much. He said it casually, but Audrey heard the weight behind the words. The nightmares that probably haunted him just like they haunted his daughter. Victor, she turned to face him and suddenly realized how close they were. Close enough that she could see his pupils dilate, feel the warmth of his breath. Audrey. Her name on his lips was a warning and a plea. Tell me to leave. She should. She absolutely should. She didn't. Victor's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. The touch was gentle, reverent, completely at odds with the dangerous man she knew him to be. I shouldn't want you, he murmured. You're too good for me, too pure for this world I live in. I'm not that good. Her voice was barely a whisper. You are. You're everything I shouldn't touch. But even as he said it, he was leaning in, his forehead coming to rest against hers. Tell me to stop. Audrey's eyes closed. She could feel the tension in him, the iron control barely holding. I can't. The words were barely out of her mouth before his lips found hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost careful, as if he was afraid she'd break. But when Audrey's hands came up to grip his shirt, something in him snapped. The kiss deepened, turned hungry, demanding. His hand slid into her hair, angling her head to give him better access, and Audrey gasped against his mouth. Victor took advantage, his tongue sweeping in, claiming her. Audrey had been kissed before, but never like this. Never with this intensity, this barely leashed passion that made her feel like she was burning from the inside out. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor's eyes were nearly black with desire. Audrey! A door slammed somewhere in the house. Voices, Marco and another guard. The spell broke. Victor pulled back, his jaw tight. I shouldn't have done that. Victor, you should go to bed. His voice was rough. Please. Audrey left, but she could feel his eyes on her all the way to her room. That night, she lay awake, fingers pressed to her still tingling lips, and wondered if she'd just made the best or worst decision of her life. Everything changed after that kiss. Victor became distant, professional. He was never rude, but the warmth had disappeared, replaced by a careful politeness that hurt more than anger would have. Audrey tried to focus on Serena, but the little girl noticed something was wrong. Did you and Papa have a fight? She asked one afternoon, her dark eyes worried. No, sweetheart. We didn't fight. Then why doesn't he smile anymore when he looks at you? Audrey had no answer for that. A week after the kiss, everything fell apart. Audrey woke to shouting. She pulled on a robe and ran into the hallway to find guards everywhere, and Victor on his phone, his face harder than she'd ever seen it. What's happening? She asked Marco as he hurried past. Security breach. Someone got through the perimeter. Get back in your room and lock the door. Fear spiked through her. Where's Serena? With her father. Safe. Now go. A crash from downstairs. Gunshots. Audrey's blood turned to ice. She ran toward Serena's room instead of her own, some instinct screaming that the little girl would be terrified. Sure enough, she found Serena standing in her doorway, tears streaming down her face. Audrey! The little girl launched herself forward and Audrey scooped her up, holding her tight. It's okay, your papa's going to handle this. Get away from her. The voice came from behind them, cold and unfamiliar. Audrey spun to find a man in the hallway, gun raised. He was young, maybe 30, with wild eyes and a smile that made her stomach turn. The boss's daughter. Perfect leverage. He gestured with the gun. Both of you. Downstairs. Now. Audrey's mind raced. If she went downstairs, they were both dead. If she refused, he'd shoot. Please, she said, her voice shaking. She's just a child. Shut up and move. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Victor appeared, and the temperature in the hallway seemed to drop. His gun was drawn, his face a mask of controlled fury. Let them go, Tony. This is between you and me. Tony, she recognized the name now, one of Victor's lieutenants who'd been caught skimming, laughed. So you think I'm that stupid? The kid's my ticket out of here. You're not leaving here alive. Victor's voice was absolute. But if you drop the gun now, I'll make it quick. Victor, Audrey started, but his eyes cut to her, sharp and warning. Close your eyes, Audrey. Both of you, close your eyes. Now. Something in his tone made her obey. She pulled Serena's face against her shoulder, the little girl trembling violently. What happened next took 3 seconds. A shot. A body hitting the floor. Then Victor's hands on her shoulders, his voice rough with emotion. It's over, you're safe, open your eyes. Audrey did. Tony was on the floor, very still, and Marco was already moving to remove the body. Victor's hands moved over her and Serena frantically, checking for injuries. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? Audrey, answer me. We're fine. We're okay. But her voice shook, and she couldn't stop trembling. Victor took Serena from her arms, and the little girl wrapped around him like a vine, sobbing. Papa, I was so scared. I know, Piccola, I know. But you're safe now. I've got you. He looked at Audrey over his daughter's head, his eyes blazing with something she couldn't name. Both of you, I've got both of you. Later, after Serena had finally cried herself to sleep in Victor's arms and been put to bed with 3 guards stationed outside her door, Audrey found herself in Victor's office, a glass of brandy in her shaking hands. I'm sorry, Victor said quietly. He stood by the window, his back to her, tension radiating from every line of his body. I promised you'd be safe here, and I failed. You didn't fail. We're alive because of you. You were in danger because of me. He turned, and Audrey saw the anguish in his face, the guilt eating him alive. Tony was my mistake. I should have handled him differently, and instead he got close enough to threaten you and Serena. Victor, you should leave. The words were quiet, final. I'll pay you for the full year, give you excellent references, but you should go somewhere safe, somewhere far from me and this life. Audrey set down her glass and stood. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. You deserve better than this, than me. She crossed to him, her heart pounding. What if I don't want better? What if I want you? Victor's jaw clenched. Audrey, don't. I'm not leaving. Not unless you physically throw me out, and even then I'll fight. She reached up, cupping his face in her hands. I see you, Victor. Not the mob boss, not the dangerous man everyone fears. I see the father who loves his daughter so much it terrifies him. The man who reads poetry and discusses art at midnight. The man who's so desperately lonely but afraid to let anyone close. You don't know what you're saying. I do. I'm saying I'm falling in love with you, and it scares me to death. But I'm not running from it. I'm not running from you. Victor's control shattered. He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. Audrey. God, Audrey. His face buried in her hair. I can't let you go. I've tried, but I can't. You've gotten under my skin, into my heart, and I don't know how to function without you anymore. She pulled back just enough to look at him. Then don't let me go. Keep me. Protect me. Love me. I do love you. That's the problem. I love you so much it's dangerous. Men in my world, they'll use you against me. They'll hurt you to hurt me. Let them try. Audrey's voice was fierce. I'm stronger than I look, and I have something they don't. I have you. Victor's thumb traced her lips. You saved my daughter, but you know what? You saved me too, from becoming a man I didn't want to be, from losing my humanity completely. Victor. His lips crashed down on hers, and this kiss was different from the first. This was claiming, possessing, a promise and a prayer all at once. Audrey melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, giving as good as she got. When they finally broke apart, Victor rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered, echoing that first word he'd ever spoken to her. Stay with me, with us. Be mine. I already am, Audrey whispered back. I think I have been, since the moment you whispered that word in the crowd. Years later, Audrey stood in the same library where Victor had first kissed her, now looking at a different piece of art. The gallery opening had been a success, her gallery, her dream realized with Victor's backing and support. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her against a solid chest. The curator looked very impressed with your Caravaggio analysis, Victor murmured against her ear. I believe he called you brilliant. He was being kind. But Audrey smiled, leaning back into her husband's embrace. He was being accurate. Victor pressed a kiss to her temple. You're brilliant, amore mio, and I'm lucky you chose to waste that brilliance on a man like me. You're not a waste. You're my greatest masterpiece. He turned her in his arms, his grey eyes soft with the love he no longer tried to hide. The dangerous mob boss was still there, would always be there. But with her and Serena, he was simply Victor, the man she loved, the man who'd saved her in every way that mattered. Mama! Papa! Serena's voice called from the doorway. At 9 years old, she was all long legs and bright smiles, with her father's eyes and her mother's heart. Uncle Marco says dinner's ready, and if you don't stop being mushy, the pasta will get cold. Victor laughed, the sound rich and warm. Tell Uncle Marco we'll be right there. Serena rolled her eyes with all the dramatic flair of a preteen, but grinned. Fine, but hurry. I want to hear more about Mama's gallery opening. She darted off, and Victor looked down at Audrey. Ready to face the family dinner interrogation? Audrey thought about her life now. The love, the security, the purpose she'd found. She thought about that scared woman in the crowd, clutching a little girl's hand, not knowing her whole world was about to change. She thought about Victor's first word to her. Stay. She'd stayed, and in staying, she'd found everything she'd never known she needed. Always, she said, taking his hand. I'm always ready, as long as you're beside me. Victor raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Then you'll always be ready because I'm never letting you go. They walked toward their daughter's laughter together, toward the family and life they'd built from chaos and danger and one desperate moment in a crowd. Some love stories begin with a kiss. Theirs had begun with a single word, a frightened child, and a choice that changed everything. And it was more beautiful than Audrey could have ever imagined.